Hello and welcome to our webinar Aligning Projects to Strategy During Economic Uncertainty, the PMO's role in doing more with less. Presenting is One Plan's Scott Daly. If you enjoy this topic, please explore our YouTube channel for more and follow us on LinkedIn to stay in the know on upcoming events.
Hello, and welcome to our webinar on aligning projects to strategy during economic uncertainty. I am Scott Daly. I am going to walk everybody through a brief set of slides on One Plan itself and what we're going to cover, and then we'll get right down to demo. One of the things I want to say to start this topic is that this is never a fun topic. When money is more restricted, you have to make tough decisions that nobody really likes to make. And one of the upshots of this is that people tend to be not good at it. They tend to want to kind of close their eyes. They tend to want to look away. They tend not to have a lot of experience with this. It tends to get emotional. And one of the things that we're going to do over the course of this is to discuss how the project management office or whoever's in charge of the portfolio of work that's going on can kind of take some of this emotion out of this and present a set of data-driven options and potentially supporting decisions that not necessarily are going to make people happy about things, but are certainly going to make people feel a little bit better. And also, by the way, kind of put people in a position where they're going to understand more why certain things need to be cut and why certain things need to be reduced. I'm going to date myself with this story, unfortunately, but I was talking to my son this morning about the fact that my grandfather would never throw away a pair of shoes because he had lived through the Depression and remembered a time when people were absolutely unable to find shoes and were desperate for them. I don't think we're heading into anything that's that dire. So I guess I want to kind of say, look, we have these tools available to kind of guide us through some maybe tougher times, but it's never going to be quite as bad, or at least hopefully will never be quite as bad as it has been in the past. So again, we're going to talk about maximizing the value of the PMO. I mean, I think this is one thing that people sometimes lose sight of and get caught up in. You don't want your organization to be the organization of no. You want your organization to be the organization of yes, and yes to these things, but maybe not yes to everything. And to do that, right, we want to take a look at everything in terms of it being an investment and what its return is to the company. So we're going to talk about, again, One Plan. We're going to clarify some of these common key considerations as we go through these things. Then we're going to go to a demonstration about how our clients use One Plan to highlight the value of the PMO. We're going to tie this up with a conclusion. You'll hear me say a couple things repeatedly through this. Number one, anything that I say about the product that seems like it's too good to be true, we encourage you to go get a free demo and try for yourself, or to schedule a separate meeting with me or someone else where we walk through this and make sure that what we're presenting really is in the product itself, and we're not putting too much of a shine on it. The second thing is that to do this demo, I run in a fairly low resolution. So I think on your laptop or your workstation, you'll have a bigger screen, but sometimes things can get a little cramped on the screen. And that's just because we're working through this webinar and I want to make sure that everything is magnified properly. Okay. So about One Plan. One Plan is an AI-enabled strategic portfolio and work management platform. And I'm going to pause a moment on AI-enabled. We're not going to dwell on this over the course of this call. But One Plan has embedded AI throughout the product, so you are able to ask contextual questions. Tell me why these projects are prioritized this way. Find the projects that look like they have the lowest return on investment. And One Plan's AI will give you answers and will explain the answers exactly as you'd expect to see from any modern AI. Moreover, the entire help desk, the entire set of help files is available also within context. So there are very few questions that can't be answered right on the spot by our AI. And it's really actually got a lot of other amazing uses. And again, we're not going to demo these things, but for example, if you are used to using project template libraries, and instead you want to go in and say, Sophia, can you give me a project of about 150 tasks for implementing some piece of enterprise software? That's can be your starting point. Of course, we have a template library as well, but really we are able to do some amazing things with AI to kind of help you move forward. And again, if anything that I'm talking about seems too good to be true, I encourage you to get a free demo and try it yourself. So we are going to talk about connecting strategy to execution, real-time insights, unifying tools and teams a little bit less, just because we're not going to dwell on that in terms of this webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about resource and capacity optimization, less about financial management, and less about supporting hybrid work delivery models. These are all topics for other webinars, but they're all there in the product itself. One plan at a glance. Everybody will get a set of slides there. Get this set of slides post-webinar, so you feel free to look through this. One plan is an end-to-end system, as we've said. It moves from demand through to planning, through to execution, through to analysis. And what this means, sorry, I got an echo there real quickly. And what this means is that when you go into a period of time where you have to look at all of the work and investments that are being made, and you need to choose which ones you're going to proceed with and which ones you're going to cut, it's all in one place. Not only what you're doing, but what you could be doing and what you have done. Consulting and advisory services. One plan is a one-stop shop for PPM solutions and services. If you are interested in implementation services, education and training, customer success and support, advisory services, these things are all available through one plan. They're not necessarily required, but they're there to support your success. Lastly, one plan is an enterprise platform. So we're going to focus on the PMO today, strategic and portfolio project management. But there are multiple other uses for one plan. So for example, if you implement one plan in part of your organization and it becomes obvious that it has utility in other parts of the organization, one plan is highly configurable and flexible and can be suited to these other areas in the same instance of one plan or an additional instance of one plan. It all depends on what your business requirements are. Key considerations, challenges faced during a downturn. I think a lot of these are pretty obvious, but they bear articulation. What will happen to the PMO in these scenarios is that somewhere at the top line, there will be reduced revenue and reduced profit margin, and people will start walking around looking for cuts. And all of these things are completely reasonable and completely obvious. But a lot of times when they filter down through to the list of projects that people are working on, it can kind of get to be less clear which ones should be cut. At the same time, which ones should absolutely be continued in order to preserve the ability to do business going forward. Increasing the value of the PMO a lot of times, again, amounts to us, instead of thinking about being the organization of no, instead us being the organization of yes, and you get these things. And a lot of that boils down to being able to discuss this just in a very, let's say, a positive and a proactive way. And again, in a less you approve this and now you're stuck with it, or we have your stamp on this saying that we have budget for this and now we need to continue this, or no, we can't possibly cut that. But instead to come into this and use language that matches with the pressure that people in leadership are feeling from the previous slide. So instead of talking about this just like, again, in terms of process or in terms of what has been committed to, we focus on the value and the ROI of what we're doing. We offer a dynamic ability to reprioritize and to do work that maybe is more important now or appears to be less important, and then consequently reducing that, to look at resource optimization and be able to present in a real way. This is what people are working on. These resources are fully saturated already. If we cut people, this is what we're going to end up having to move. Or to say, look, We have people that are idle, and instead of us looking at which projects we should cut, we should be looking at using resources more efficiently, assessing these things based on risk, and of course, down at the bottom, kind of saying, look, and by the way, this is all governed well and visible, and nothing is secret. And when you call me into a meeting, I'm ready to go. This last point being what I think maybe one of the most important things. If somebody from leadership suddenly has an interest in something, being able to walk in and say, this is all in one place. I'm confident that what's in the system is real and legitimate, and I can have this discussion without needing to go through and shuffle through a bunch of PowerPoint slides and Excel spreadsheets, but instead be able to walk in and say, I've got this right in hand, is a big part of making sure that the PMO is perceived as high value. Portfolio balancing, which we've already covered. Other aspects of business much consider. As we go through this, a lot of these things can be evaluated on a per project basis, depending on ultimately what is important, again, to leadership. Everybody in leadership has a different perspective on things, and if we're going to talk about, for example, workforce engagement and morale, but leadership is only interested in customer retention and experience, it's best to shift that communication in the customer retention and experience direction. Now, you might subordinate workforce engagement and morale to customer retention and experience, for example, but still, you want to be able to go in and present what you're doing and what the PMO is in charge of as aligning with leadership's primary concern. And we're going to talk about how to do that in the demo and make sure that some of those things are obvious. Again, if anybody wants to come back and have a personal demo or wants to actually create a demo themselves or a demo instance themselves and work through it themselves, please either reach out to us or feel free to do so. And we'll have some instructions on that a little bit later. The gist of this, however, is to make sure that what you are representing in one plan and your meetings matches up with what is the focus of leadership, and that you're in a position where when leadership's focus and or interests shift, you have a product that is able to shift with that and to ensure that you're actually communicating in a way that reemphasizes the value of the PMO. Common challenges, again, failure to align investment. This is mechanical, but we're going to talk about this and show this. Focus on short-term budget rather than being able to see the long-term. We're actually going to show some of this as well. Cut services and staff. We'll speak to that in terms of the demo, and a reactionary, undisciplined approach. I think this is maybe one of the most important things, is that we want to shift it as much as we can to a data-driven decision support mindset and model, and one plan the product underneath that to make sure that you're able to do those things in a dynamic and rapidly responsive fashion. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about feature sets. I think it's very interesting how frequently we lose sight of what each kind of feature set does in terms of how it impacts the past, the present, and the future. So we're going to talk a lot about OKRs, modeling and optimizing in terms of this particular webinar. Current tasks, active projects, weekly status reports. One plan supports all these things, and of course, timesheets, status reports, integration with financials. We support all those things as well. But what we're really going to focus on in terms of this webinar is what will or could happen. Presenting, again, data-driven options for optimization to leaders and making them feel good about the fact that they are making hard decisions, but they're making hard decisions based on what's actually going on and not just kind of random emotional decisions, I guess. Okay. Basic action to take, realign what you've got in the system, model scenarios, we're going to show that, rebalancing the portfolio, we're going to show that as well, optimizing resources, aligning with OKRs, and reconfirming strategic alignment. We're going to show 2, 3, 4, and 5 because those fit well in the demo. But each item on this list is something that it should be done proactively. Again, keeping in mind that leadership is your audience in this. Okay, so the demonstration. We're going to leverage one plan to present options, identify optimized scenarios, support data-driven decision making, and make the high-value contribution of the PMO obvious. This is again, I've already said it, but I think people sometimes lose sight of this. There's always salesmanship that needs to be done in an organization, or you could end up being the one that's perceived as superfluous. All right, demo structure, objectives and key results, modeler. We'll go through portfolio prioritization, cards and roadmap functionality, and resource capacity planning. Objectives and key results. Okay, we're going to start the demo. Let me swap over. This is one plan, kind of very briefly. This demo, we're going to cover a lot of functionality at a very shallow level. And I want everybody to kind of be aware of that. There's a lot going on here. This should definitely not be considered a tutorial, but more like a survey of what could be done. But briefly, we have navigation fully configurable by administrator, drag and droppable down the side. We have kind of the basics of widgets and tools you'd expect in a project management tool or a portfolio management tool across the top. We're going to talk about each one of these things. And in the center, we have this notion of lists. You'll see later we have boards and roadmap as well. So I'm going to start with my strategy. And I'm going to collapse this to gain a little screen real estate. One plan enables you to have a varied and configurable set of plan types. We'll see later on that these are projects and portfolios as well. But for this section, we're going to focus on objectives. I can see that I have an objective, improve IT infrastructure. I want to drill down into this and see what the key results are underneath this. That looks great and is very obvious. I can also come over here and I can look at the details for this. And I can see that it has its own workflow across the board in one plan. Items have a configurable workflow depending on which one they are. So you do not necessarily have to go through approvals and a workflow process, but you can. And again, it is completely configurable. Everything you see below is configurable. So all of these fields and all of this data and their arrangement are things that you would be able to configure. And we see a list of key results down here below. We're also able to visualize the connections between these things. So you can see that we have an objective column. And again, I'm running at kind of a low resolution, so we can't see all this. But I can see that here I have this particular objective. Then I can see the key results it links to. I can see the projects that support those key results. And I can see the products that are impacted. And in this case, over here a little bit further, I can see capabilities and applications as well. The gist of this is if you are leveraging objectives and key results, you can see which projects are supporting which key results, which puts you in an obvious position to say, well, we don't want to cut, for example, product launch because it supports the implemented automated backup system. Now you may want to, whatever, but you're able to kind of look at this from a quick level and present to somebody, this is the map of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I kind of want to just dwell on this 1 second further and say the utility of this is really incredible, because now you are not walking in and saying it's all very complicated and we can't unpack this. You're able to sit in front of somebody on the spot and say, this is the map of what we're doing. If we want to cut things, which one do you think we should cut? Okay, going to come back to details real quickly, and I'll drill down one level to the key result, reduce server downtime. And you can see we've got the same kind of screen, but again, completely configurable. It has also its own workflow as well. All of these fields are configurable as well as the variances. One thing that I want to highlight in terms of these kinds of key result metrics, one plan is able to track trends over time and display them. So if you are actively managing these key results, you are able to look at this and say, wow, you know, we're really delivering whatever that metric is. We're really delivering this in a steeply climbing curve or a declining curve. You know, maybe this metric then is something that you're looking at saying, well, you know, we're getting less and less out of this than we thought, so this is a good place to cut. Then you can cut the projects along with that. Description, again, completely configurable, and kind of all the plans that are associated with this as well. We're able to do the same thing in terms of visualization. And if I want to come in and I want to take a look at reporting, for example, I'm able to do that. This is going to go off to Power BI. Let me just sign in. As a side note, one plan comes with a large number of Power BI reports. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But also you can build reports directly in system, so you don't have to necessarily go to your reporting organization or your reporting specialists. In addition to supporting, of course, Power BI and coming with Power BI reports, one plan is open for reporting across any system. So as long as you can consume an OData feed, you'd be able to build whatever reports and dashboards you need. All right. So objectives and key results, again, we're moving through this very quickly, and I want everybody to understand that this is obviously a survey rather than a deeper demo. So let's talk about Modeler a little bit next. So for starters, what is Modeler? The great thing about Modeler is that it takes all of your active data that can include proposed projects and projects in flight and closed projects and whatever else matters, and pulls it into a model based on whatever criteria you want that you can then manipulate without manipulating your actual working enterprise data. So you're able to what if freely, build scenarios freely, make changes and present options, all without actually impacting your production data. At the same time, you are leveraging 100% of your production data. So again, what this means is instead of circling between PowerPoints and possible spreadsheets, you're able to pull these models and scenarios together in hours instead of weeks. And it's actually all correct. And then, of course, having presented a scenario or, having come to a set of decisions and then having leadership change their mind, you're able to make the changes here quickly rather than have to go through and do, again, all this by hand. So it's a huge time-saving item for most PMOs that choose to leverage this. But more importantly, it's one of those things that makes a PMO look absolutely terrific and on top of things if you're able to pull this data together quickly. And again, it stops you from being the organization of no, and instead you're in a position where you can say, hey, we've got options for you based on what you just said. So what we have in this case is 100% of the projects that we've chosen to pull into this model. You can see we've got an inline and an outline. But if I come in and I want to apply a scenario, so I'm able to save as many scenarios within this model as I want. I've got a $15 million, $10 million scenario. If I say, show me the $10 million scenario that I built earlier and saved, we load it, and I look at this, and suddenly I've got the projects that are out and the projects that are in. We have 19 versus 26. Again, you can kind of start to see, well, now I'm already able to have different models depending on what I want. If I wanted to take a look at these two and say, I need to actually compare these two, again, these are all completely configurable. I want to compare the $10 million model to the $15 million model. I want to see what's in, what's out, and what the priorities are for these items, for example, in this particular configuration. I'm able to see all these in one place. And if I choose, I'm able to export these to Excel, for example, for further calculation or for making it pretty for a PowerPoint. Our clients do still do these things, just so everybody's aware, but you actually get 90% of it done very rapidly before you need to go to a PowerPoint instead of doing all your work in a PowerPoint and locking yourself in. We're also able to look at these things in terms of resource impact, and we'll talk a little bit more about resource capacity modeling later on. We're Interestingly, also able to talk about this in terms of budget impact. If I do all these items, let's go ahead and just do the none scenario. In this case, I am over budget if I do all of these projects, for example. But if I come in and I say, well, you know, I'm willing to spend $15 million. How does that impact my budget? I can see that I'm now in green across the board. I'm also able to look at this in terms of, and this is configurable as well, but I'm able to look at this in terms of benefits. So if I'm making decisions not based on cutting budget, but based on benefit, in this case, we don't have anything filled in, but I'm able to look at it in those terms as well and apply the various scenarios. If I want to visualize this in this place, I'm able to take a look at this also in terms of objectives, key results. So I'm tying everything back to the strategy that I laid out at the top. And again, I might look at this and say, oh, I've got this integration project down here in terms of planning, but it doesn't support anything at all. It's not connected to a key result or to an objective. You know, maybe that becomes an obvious target for cutting, for example. And again, you're in a position where instead of saying no, you're able to present this and say, oh, look, you know, we've got this thing called process improvement. It doesn't support anything at all. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. That's a really rapid pass through on how the modeler works. I hope that the takeaway from that is that you're able to leverage modeler to do multiple scenarios, again, make data-driven decisions, and you're able to do so rapidly in a way that is going to really make you look like a star. Portfolio prioritization. So again, we're going to kind of really take a quick pass through one plan. But you can see that you have absolutely everything available in terms of a hierarchy here. Again, you've seen the plan type is now shifted to portfolio, programs, projects, and epics. This is all configurable, and of course, you can have multiple hierarchies within the system. Each one of these items has its own workflow. I'm just going to kind of come down here to the data warehouse migration project. Actually, instead of doing that, I'm going to pause here a minute and say we have a list of demo views. These are all completely configurable and savable. So if I come in here and I say, you know, instead I want to look at trending across this portfolio in terms of me trying to decide what I want to continue on and what I don't want to continue on, I'm able to see all that in one place in terms of budget, active issues, or any other configurable item that you might want. And again, this is all really only limited by business requirements. There's no particular technical limit on this. If I wanted to do this portfolio prioritization and say, you know, all right, I want to look at this in terms of a calculated prioritization field, I'm able to do that, but I'm also able to drag and drop prioritization if that's what I want to do as well. So a lot of times you will make a lot of effort to have a calculated prioritization field and you want to use it, but then, you know, leadership will choose to want to reprioritize things on the fly. You're able to do that in a drag and drop fashion as well. Okay, so I'm going to move quickly. This view should be again, we could talk at length about this, but in terms of leveraging this to see what you're working on across your entire organization, and this includes obviously. Let me go back and change this portfolio summary view. And open this up. The thing I want to emphasize on this is we're able to see across all of the work, not just necessarily maybe project work, but what's going on in Jira or what's going on in other products as well. You know, how deep that goes is a subject for another webinar. But you've got it all in one place, and depending on how you wanted your fields calculated, you can see across the board at a glance, these are the things that are going well. Or again, if you want to characterize these things in terms of what's important to your leadership, you're able to show them this and say, look, you know, here's these things that snap to this alignment that you wanted, and you know, do you really want to cut this, or do you want to cut something else that doesn't snap to your alignment? We're able to see the same thing in terms of a board view as well, and this is a common feature across one plan where the exact same data can be presented not only in a list view, but it can be presented in a board view. This is a drag and drop environment as well, so if you want to manage this particularly in a Kanban fashion, you're able to. Columns across the top and rows down the side are completely configurable. We're able to kind of see this in terms of, let's say, goals by program. We can see what our status is, and we can see what our we can see what our status or our program goals are and which ones align to this. And again, drag and drop these depending on what we want, supporting dependencies across these as well. We can drill into each one of these projects along the way if we want to as well. So actually, you know what? I apologize. I realize I skipped forward without kind of filling this in. Cards and roadmap is what we're on at this point. So I'm going to come back to cards and roadmap real quickly. We also have a roadmap view. And across this roadmap view, again, completely configurable. We have time frame across the top. In this case, particular grouping by plan or business unit across the bottom. Multiple views available, again, configurable. So we group this by goals, for example, which I think actually it might have already been in. Yeah, customer satisfaction. We're able to get this top-down view of what's happening in the organization. Again, putting the PMO in a position to be able to say to leadership, we're going to have to make some cuts. Well, these are the things that are already almost done and moving forward. We probably don't want to cut those at a glance because we're almost completed. We've made a big investment and we're almost over the line. But these other items, they might not fit your goal, or they might be in a position where they quite haven't started yet, or there's a minimal investment, and we might want to delay these things. Delaying is just a matter of dragging and dropping as well. So in all these things, if you want to make changes on the fly to your actual enterprise data, you're able to. Although generally speaking, we would say, no, you should really kind of go back to the modeler and make sure that's what you want to do, and then come in and make the change. Okay. And as I said earlier, these are all reports that can be built on the fly inside one plan without necessarily going to Power BI. Power BI or any other reporting tool is always available depending on how sophisticated your requirements and your needs are. But if you need to build inside one plan itself and you want to have real-time data, you are able to do that without any issue at all. And then Power BI is still available over here if you want to have a tab that is separate as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility in terms of reporting right on the spot. Again, if you're in a meeting and you need to be able to show something very quickly, you probably wouldn't want to build a report on the fly, although you could, but you probably want to have your dashboard pre-constructed that'll kind of inform what exactly the set of decisions that you want to make. Okay. All right. So we've been through, I love the fact that I keep having to see this typo that I have made on item number 2. We've been through objectives and key results, the model, the portfolio prioritization, cards and roadmap, and we're going to talk at last about resource capacity planning. Resource capacity planning is exactly what it says it is. It is a resource-centric view of the world designed to optimize the actual utilization of each of your resources. So you can see in kind of a color-coded environment that's deliberately very spreadsheet-like, where so you can edit directly in the cells if that's what you want to do. But you can see who is busy, who is over capacity, who is under capacity at a glance. You can assign them to different projects or tasks depending on what you need to do. And interestingly as well, and again, this is something that we're going to just kind of go through kind of quickly, I'm able to look at these things in terms of a comparison. What the key is here is that as you go through and you are optimizing your resources, and again, you may be sitting with leadership looking at this and saying, look, we've got a lot of people with a lot of availability. This is great. We don't actually have to make the cuts that we think we do. We can just shift things around. But you're also able to see what the resource demand is from the project schedule as well. So you can look in one place and compare what you want to do with your resources to make sure that they are fully busy with what is actually going on in the project schedule. And you're able to go back and talk to the project manager and say, listen, we need to make sure that we're using people wisely because we're in a period where things are a little bit crunched. So you're going to need to adjust your schedule to match to this resource plan. They're probably not going to like that, but they can see it all in one place as well. So the short of this is, and again, we could do a whole webinar just on resource capacity planning, and we're obviously not going to. The short of this is that we're able to look at this, leveraging the information that's actually in the system, and say, okay, here is what we could be doing. Here's what people are doing. Do we want to make adjustments to be sure that they're focusing on the right things, and that maybe we're avoiding cuts instead of saying, oh, look, we need to kill these projects. We really actually just need to move some people around, and we can make sure that we're continuing to drive these investments forward, that contribute to the future growth of the business. Okay. So that was resource capacity planning. Well, I've got some summary and next steps. Again, when we look at this and we want to leverage these things, one plan puts you in a great position to look like a star and make sure that you are coming in with answers before your meeting starts without a huge runaround, and to be able to present options based on what your leadership wants, all in one place very rapidly. We're absolutely able to provide free trials for anything that I've said, and I know we'd be very happy if you called back and had questions about what I've claimed. In terms of kind of moving forward with this, I think it's important to keep in mind always that people aren't going to enjoy this process. It's not a good time when a company isn't growing, and nobody wants to be particularly good at it. And again, I'm going to say people get very emotional about these things. To be in a position where you've got where you are consistently able to offer options, and again, it's consistently data driven instead of emotion driven, is a big win for most. Free trials. We have a set of templates that are available. It doesn't ultimately matter which template you pick. These are all configured templates. So in theory, you could change one template to another template by reconfiguring it. Moreover, if you start with one template and you decide you don't like it and you want to use a different template, that's no problem. You can always pick up a different free trial as well. But one way or the other, I would encourage you to go to this page and, like I said, validate any claims that I've made. And with that, thank you. I've appreciated your time. We've covered a lot of ground all at once, and we would welcome any questions or ask for clarifications that you come back with. And thank you.